What's going on, everybody? It's your boy Kilo Loco,
This is Eman Harut.
and welcome to the Code Passionately podcast, where we talk about everything that's important to mobile developers. So, we got another awesome topic this week, and Eman is super excited to present it. What are we talking about this week, Eman?
Yes, so today, this is probably the topic I've been most excited about to talk. If you couldn't tell from me bombarding your Discord at like 7 a.m. this morning. Today, we're going to be talking about all these like tips and like wisdom from other developers about things you could apply while you're learning. We kind of tentatively named this learning efficiently, but yeah, this advice and this guidances are going to provide you more and more value over time. So if you start doing this early on, it'll keep giving you dividends over time. So yeah, and none of these are rules, obviously. Like, I don't want people to think like we're saying this is exactly how you have to do things. Take whatever works for you, leave whatever doesn't. But yeah, so let's just jump right into the first one. So the very first piece of advice we have for developers who are learning programming is to start with a goal or an end in mind. So a lot of times when we're developing, we don't have like a direction. We're kind of just like learning whatever tutorials pop up on our feed. And that's a really inefficient way to learn things, right? What you want to do is figure out your end goal. So everything you do kind of pushes you closer to that goal, right? So if you want a job as an iOS or Android developer, figure out what those things are you need. Like, you need to learn UIKit, you need to learn Swift UI, and focus on that. Do you have any like thoughts or any additional advice you want to put on this, Kilo?
Yeah, and like the most important thing about picking one thing to focus on, or starting with the end goal in mind, is the fact that it does give you one thing to kind of focus on. And a lot of people, what they will do is they'll kind of feel like they need to learn this and that and this and that, and these topics aren't always related to each other. So what makes a lot more sense a lot of the time is to focus on, hey, I want to learn this one specific thing so I can achieve this one specific goal, and that's going to actually help get you there much faster. It'll also cut out like all the unnecessary information, because you can just go down rabbit hole after rabbit hole, learn all kinds of information about any given topic in programming, really. And it may not even be relevant to the information that you need in order to achieve the goal. Now, is it a benefit to actually going down some of those rabbit holes? Absolutely, it's totally beneficial to go down some of those rabbit holes sometimes. But especially when you're first starting out, what you want to do is you want to try to have more of a laser focus. Make sure that you're going after the thing that you came here to like actually do.
Yes, exactly. And I think that's the key right there. Is it's not bad to veer off, especially if something interests you. Like, go off and learn it. Part of programming is you get to do cool things that might have nothing to do with the job you want to do. But overall, you should have a sense of like where you want to go and what steps you need to take to achieve that. And
And
the
I'll
second,
also say
yeah,
that before we move on, I'll say that, like, this is something that you're going to run up against as a self-taught programmer. If you do choose to go down that path to learn, you're going to go down a couple of rabbit holes, and it's actually great because then you build like this depth of knowledge about something that you're working on. But it may not be relevant right then and there, but it may be relevant in the future. So there are kind of like pros and cons to like going down these rabbit holes when you're choosing to build something. But always remember, the focus is to get the job done. Even when you get hired, the focus is to actually get this thing working as expected.
yeah. So ask yourself what you want, what the end goal looks like, and that way you have a target, you have direction. You're not an archer without like a target to aim at. Another thing that kind of relates to this as well is to um, don't think just because you're practicing and constantly studying that means you're doing all the right things. I think what was that saying? It's better to learn the right things than to learn Oh man, I don't even remember. Basically,
You just
learning
making
for
up sayings over here. He's quoting his own advice, and he's just gonna.
don't learning for learning's sake isn't necessarily a good thing, because there's an infinite amount of stuff you could learn out there. And believe me, I've had those nights where I'm up at like 3 4 a.m. learning random like AV foundation, this that, like stuff that had nothing to do with anything, but I just thought I needed to learn it just because I'm going to be an iOS developer.
And all
So
he really
unless
needed to do was just put a button on the screen. That's all he had to do. I don't know what I don't know.
basic UI kit. I don't know. That's why I should have had a goal in mind. But yeah,
Uh,
practice. So don't just practice for practice sake. Like actually have a use case for what you're doing. And that pretty much sums it up for me on this one. Do you have anything else you want to add, Kilo?
no, I think yeah, I would like to say like pretty much just reiterate what you said, where it's like, make sure that you're doing things with intention. You're not just consuming random information. So, for an example, I do YouTube videos. I put out a wide variety of topics. I want people to watch my videos, but if you were to just continuously watch the same person's videos, a lot of the stuff that they're going to be teaching, right, is not going to be relevant to your specific situation. So why would you go out and spend your time watching all this content where it's not even relevant to your situation? So what you want to do is you want to be like very intentful with your time and with what you're learning, and make sure that you're not just consuming information just for the sake of it, like just like Eman said.
Yeah, you need a filter, and you need to know I need to hit A, B, C. And if you do that early on, if you define those goals that you need to hit, you'll learn programming so much faster. You're not just being pulled in every direction. Another thing is to, oh, and this one I'm actually pretty bad at, but it's use what you learn constantly. So if you're picking up like AV Foundation or any other framework, you don't want to get stuck in what we call tutorial hell, which is where you're just constantly learning, and you're never applying what you're learning. And the importance of applying what you're learning is that it really helps you internalize the material, and for you to truly understand the material. It's just one thing to know it on the surface, but when you practice it, it sticks into your brain a lot better.
Yeah, so two things on that, right? First, let's say that I put out let's say I put out a online course, a Udemy course, right? I put out a Udemy course. I price it for $200. You get it for $10, and then you start watching my and then you start watching my course, right? So then what happens is you watch my course, but you actually never took the time to type out the things that I was typing. I said that you're going to learn X, Y, and Z. You feel like you're going to learn X, Y, and Z just by watching the course, right? And yes, you'll learn some of the theory about X, Y, and Z, and you'll kind of have an idea of how some of these things might fit together. But 1 week from the time that you watch it, you're probably going to forget most of it, and on top of that, you won't actually be ready to implement that thing, right? So you do need to actually implement these things. If you are going to spend time watching or reading an article or a tutorial, and it's taking you step by step on how to actually implement something, take the time to implement that thing, because just watching it doesn't help anybody. It doesn't help you. You're not going to learn it faster if you just watch it. Now, if you need to watch it through one time and then go back, then by all means, however you want to do it. But you actually need to practice and do this thing. The other thing that I was going to say is that you don't want to go through this tutorial hell where you're learning content that isn't relevant to you. So once again, make sure that you're very specific with what how you choose to spend your time when you're learning.
There was, I remember early on when I was learning iOS development, there's the delegate pattern, right? It's kind of like one of the first things a lot of people get tripped up on. And I remember I just wrote down the steps. You need to create a protocol. You need to have a delegate property. You need to assign the delegate. And then like I opened up a new project. I would just, practice that a few times. And eventually it became like, muscle memory. I didn't need to look at that list anymore because I internalized it. And that's kind of what we're telling people to do. Like, make a project and just start coding what you learned. Like, if you're learning how to set up a specific kind of UI, or using auto layout, or doing a thing in Swift UI, just do it separately outside of that tutorial. And yeah,
Also, another thing right before we move that topic is that you can, like, once you go through and you implement a pattern, save it to a GitHub repo, right? Because then this helps you with like your portfolio. It makes you kind of seem like if somebody's looking at your activity in terms of GitHub, commits for whatever reason, I don't think it's a relevant way to measure a developer, but if they are doing that, right, then you have some GitHub activity, and then on top of that you have a searchable base of code where you're able to look back and say, oh, how did I do that thing, how did I implement the delegate pattern? You open up your project and then you can see, oh yeah, I did it this way. And then on top of that, what you can do is you can be like, oh, you know what, I didn't like the way that this specific thing worked out, I'm going to make a minor adjustment here. And that's what really takes you to the next level of programming.
Yeah, that's actually a huge tip, and that's exactly one of those tips. Specifically, like starting to store code snippets. Right, every time you learn something, you don't want to have to relearn it again in the future, or have to load all that stuff into your brain. It's better if you distill it, take notes on it, write a code sample, and then store it away. And then you're gonna use that hundreds of times going into the future. And it's been one of the most helpful things in my practice as a developer. And
That actually
this
takes
kind of
us to our next topic. That's
yeah.
a perfect segue for our next topic.
Yeah. So the next tip is to basically focus on referencing things instead of recalling things. Another way of saying this is, don't memorize every single thing out there, but just remember where it is, and you could look it up when you need it again. So I fell into this trap myself. I feel like most developers kind of fall into these same pitfalls, because I hear it from everyone. You start learning and you think you need to remember every single function and every single API and object out there. And that's really not the case. There are some core things you want to have more ingrained in you, but a lot of things you're going to just want to remember. If I ever need to do this thing, I just need to look into this framework, or I need to look into this object. And just having that reference in your head is a lot lighter on your brain, and that's really all you need. And even senior developers will tell you they don't memorize everything. They use Google every single day to do even some of the more simple tasks that people would be surprised by.
Yep, absolutely. So let me talk to you a little bit about like who I am as a developer, right? So like I said, I have a YouTube channel, and I'll teach different topics that I don't necessarily know too well, and I use that video as an opportunity to learn that topic, right? And what will happen is I'll put out this video, and then weeks or months or years later, I'll need to re-implement that thing, and then I completely forget how to do it. So I actually end up going back to watch my own content. And you can do the very same thing. You don't need to be a YouTuber or a article writer or anything like that. That's what GitHub is for, or any type of searchable repo that you can set up. As long as you have access to your old code and you know where to find it, that's the most important thing. So what you want to do is you want to know how to make the connections and know that the correct ways to search for the technology, and what are the important vocabulary words, I guess, would be one way to say it. It's like, what is an important search term for me to enter into Google so I can find the information that I'm looking for? And this is very helpful, especially when you're drawing on topics that are essentially outside of your your current scope of work, right? So what I mean by that is, if you are doing something new for the first time and you know how it's implemented on one platform, let's say you're an iOS developer and you needed to do something similar on Android for whatever reason, then what you can do is you can use your vocabulary that you know for iOS, and you can type it into Google, and then you can find a similar fix for Android, if that makes any sense. So it all comes down to your ability to actually find the information. Nobody's expecting you to memorize this information. Well, unless you go to an interview, in which case, traverse this binary tree. So.
I hate that. I hate those interviews. Anyway, there is some science behind this, and I want to lightly touch on this. Have you heard of mind palaces?
I have not. What's that?
Okay, so back in like ancient Rome / Greece, people would memorize like tens and thousands of pages or scrolls of information. And, today we're looking back at them and trying to figure out like how are they able to memorize so many things. And even today you have people who like memorize pi to like the 10,000th digit, right? And what they do is they create like a physical palace in their mind, and they'll have like a front door. They'll come in and they'll see something there that they want to remember. And the stranger and more memorable it is, the easier. And then they go to the bedroom and they see this there, and they go to the kitchen and they kind of place things that they want to memorize into this fictitious home. And by doing that, that makes them be able to memorize hundreds and thousands of things. Why am I bringing that up here? Because when you're trying to memorize things, your mind isn't really good at that, but your mind is good at remembering things once it sees it somewhere. And so, for example, if I wanted to, just from memory, without any help, like remember how to code this thing, my brain's not good at that. It's just not going to happen, right? But if I want to look in a specific place, like in this Xcode project, in this specific feature, in this specific file, I'll remember that for some reason. Like our brain is very good at remembering where things are. And when you look at where those things are, it's also good at quickly remembering everything about it once you see it. So all this is to say, use that to your advantage. Don't try to memorize everything in here. Put it somewhere out there in the world for you to go and recognize it later. Your brain is way better at recognizing things instead of recalling it from scratch on your own. That is the mind palace.
Got it.
Yeah. So that's like, you haven't seen Sherlock, and now I know you haven't seen Sherlock because you didn't know what a mind palace was. You need to go watch that show.
I'll check it out for sure.
I'm disappointed in you. The next one is understand the code and don't understand the code. I kind of put this both because in different contexts, a different approach is correct. And you
He
can
also wants to try to confuse you a little bit, so there's that too.
That's kind of that's what this whole show has been about from the beginning, and that's been my mischievous plan. Understanding the code. When would you say, Kilo? Because let me give some context first. When people learn, sometimes they dig deeper into code. Like for example, they see an object from Apple's library, right? And they might wonder like, oh, how does it do this thing? And they might command click into it and go look at the source code and try to dig deeper and figure out like how they implemented this, right? So there's a good time to do that and there's a bad time to do that. And at least that's what I believe. And I think this is correct because I do think both approaches are valid. When do you think it's a good time to dig in deeper, and when do you think it's not a good time?
Well, here we go with the senior developer answer. It really depends, right? And it depends on what situation you're currently in and what the end goal is. Remember, it's all about the end goal and what we're trying to accomplish. So if you are actually interested, like let's say you have an assignment, and no, let's say that you're applying for a job, and the take home project is essentially make a networking request to this API. They give you the API and then render the data to the screen. Simple enough.
It's not a binary search anymore all of a sudden. Okay.
Oh, no. They're actually asking you to do something that's relevant for the job this time. So,
yeah.
So what ends up happening is, okay, you wanna impress them. Sure. But the main thing is that you need to get the job done. So what you could do is You could, and let's say that you have to do something complex. It has to be like a multi-part form request to this API, right? So what you could do is you can learn how to do all this stuff using URL session, and you can, figure out how to actually format the body and the headers and all this other stuff. Or what you could do is you could use a third-party framework that's available for free, like Alamo Fire, which is what is used by iOS developers on the Swift with Swift, the programming language, to do networking requests. So you could just import that package into your project, and you can, write 3 lines of code and it does it, and then you can move on to doing something more important. So if you are in the situation to where you're trying to get the job done, because that's more important than trying to impress them with building your whole entire own little networking service, which could definitely have problems, then what you want to do is you want to just, use what is already provided to you for free. Use whatever tools you have at your disposal, because that's going to be way more efficient for most companies. Like 99% of the time, do the thing that's fast, not do the thing that's necessarily correct, is unfortunately the use case that you see in a lot of businesses. Now, if you have some downtime and you're looking to actually find out how networking works, and that's just something that you want to learn, or if you're tasked with making something that is like, let's say you're part of the infrastructure team and you want to make something that's easier to use, and you have to do some type of advanced networking for your team, right? Then yes, it makes more sense for you to figure out, hey, how does Alamo Fire do this? How can I do this in URL session, which is the first party framework that allows me to do some networking, and how can I optimize this? Or do I need to go out and build something and use something that's lower under the hood or something like that? That's when you go a little bit deeper. So hopefully that scenario kind of breaks down when you should choose one or the other, whether you should just use what's provided and just be like, okay, this thing is battle tested, it's used by thousands of developers, I don't need to look into it really. Or do I need to go out and build my own special thing, and I actually need the full understanding of how the inner workings work in order for me to actually build something new from it?
We're eye to eye on this. You gave like a really professional outlook on it, which is good. I would just say, like, yeah, if you're working, if you already have a job, right? One of the talents as an iOS developer is to know when to build your own thing and when to import a dependency. And it's a trade-off. Like, do you have the time to build it? Is it worth building it? Is the library well maintained? There are all these different factors that go into it. But yeah, sometimes it's the right answer to just rely on someone else's code, especially if you're constrained for time. And you touched on that. So if you're in an interview, just rely on the code and don't worry about how it works. It makes things so much easier and quicker. Other times, you're going to want to dive deep and learn more about how they did that. And I think that's healthy because, one, as developers, I think we have like curious minds and we want to understand how someone engineered this thing. And when you dig deeper, you learn new tricks and you learn new Swift features that possibly you didn't know existed before. And you start adding these tools into your arsenal. Without that, you're kind of limited to your own narrow way of doing things, right? And then you all of a sudden see new tools and new ways. So I think that's when I think it's good to dig deeper into the code to kind of expand a little and learn different ways of doing things.
But what you also need to do is you need to keep in mind which platform you're on, right? As a mobile developer, because different platforms approach problems very differently. So for iOS, it's very common for iOS developers to actually build out their own thing. And the reason for that is because Apple provides such great APIs that it's actually really easy to reproduce a lot of these really popular libraries that are used, a lot of the popular third-party libraries, because most of the time you don't need all the features of that third-party library, and that one can do like a whole lot of different things when you really only need this specific use case. So keep that in mind. Now, for Android and for Flutter and React Native, if you're going down any of these routes, keep in mind that it is very common for you to pull in all kinds of different packages and third-party resources in order to get something to work. So you always want to keep in mind which platform you're on, and make sure that you're doing essentially what's kind of the norm in that community, because if you try to go against the grain in one of those communities, it's going to be a little bit harder for you.
Here's a perspective or a context to think of this from. What if you're going through an online course and they have like a project, and that project already has some of their own code in it, right? That's a great opportunity. If you're curious and you want to see how these professionals did it, just go into their code and see like how they did things, right? So even like apart from like everything you said about cocoa pods and third party dependencies, absolutely correct. In general, I think we would encourage people to lean on their own native stuff and build stuff from scratch. But it is the correct answer to sometimes just import a library. But when you're learning from someone else's project and they have all this helper code already built in, and you want to know how they did that, that's a cool chance to just dive into that. And everything else you said about when not to do it, also true. One aspect I'll just add to all this is that one of the fundamental parts of object oriented programming is to be able to trust that an object will know how to do what it's responsible to do. And part of that trust is to not look into every little thing and understand the implementation of every little thing, because eventually you get to a lower and lower level and it doesn't really benefit you to know like on the lowest layer how things are implemented. You kind of need to eventually trust that whoever made this framework knows what they're doing, and as long as it behaves the way you expect it to when you code in it, you're fine. You don't need to understand every little thing, so there's that as well.
And that's the situation that a lot of people will actually find themselves in, and that's because when you're brought onto a team, when you're brought into any existing code base, the idea is not let's go ahead and rewrite this code base. The idea is build on top of the code base. So you really have to be able to trust what already exists and continue to follow that pattern. So that's just another little tidbit that you need to keep in mind.
Yeah, I often find that I default to trusting more lately, and if something goes wrong or it's not working the way I expect it to, then I look at the implementation. But before that, a lot of times it's not necessary. So that was some of the tips that me and Kyle put together. We deliberately didn't do like a deep dive, heavy research into this episode because we wanted to kind of gather community feedback on this, especially since this is something that draws on people's experience more. And we collected several tweets, and we want to kind of share it with you guys and gals and see, what y'all think about it.
Yeah, so
So
I'll start by reading
yeah.
out like the actual tweet that I posted out. What was it, like a week ago? So the tweet that I put out, it says, me and Eman are going to do a podcast episode on learning efficiently. Help us by sharing your thoughts. What are some tips you'd give to beginners learning to code? I don't even know how to read my own words. And what are some common mistakes they should avoid? So yeah, we had a couple of great recommendations, and Eman, you want to kick us off with Rick?
Yeah, yeah. I'll start by saying these were really hard to pick because we got so many good responses. But yeah, this is some of our favorite ones. So Rick said he gave three: pair program every chance you get. That's one. Two, hands-on keyboard and build. There's no way around it. To get better at programming, you have to program. Three, think about what you're doing. Don't just copy and paste code. To yourself, explain why you're doing it. So this resonated with me because I feel like a lot of times it's easy to just write the code and move on, but really go line by line and really think about like how each step contributes to the overall problem you're trying to solve. That gives you a much deeper understanding of what you're doing, and also understanding your code is much greater than just copy and pasting code, especially if you have a job, right? Like you can't just copy and paste code off Stack Overflow, drop it in, and expect it works. You need to validate that to make sure it's exactly what you want. But when you're learning, you just want to understand it. It's not a liability thing. You just want to know what the hell is going on. So I really liked Rick's response here.
Yeah. Like I actually want to look at each one of these real quick individually because I like everything that he pointed out. So, pair programming every chance you get, right? The benefit there is that you're with somebody that is going to be looking over your shoulder, or you guys are going to be working on a problem together. You're going to see how a different developer would handle the problem. And, you could discuss and talk about some of the things that may come up if you implement it a certain way as opposed to another way. Really great piece of advice. Hands on the keyboard. We already kind of touched on this, but like I said, if you're just consuming but you're not actually doing, it's just not going to stick. It doesn't count for anything for the most part. And then copying and pasting code that you actually understand. I agree with this for the most part, but you don't necessarily always need to understand every single line. There have been times where I copy and pasted code that it was just like a math formula, and I just pasted it. And as long as it gave me the correct output, then I was fine with that. I didn't need to understand all the math, like the logic to the math that was going on behind it. There have been times where it's not even math related, where I used some stuff that I didn't fully understand, but it seemed like this was like the most upvoted approach. So I kind of, I took the upvotes as kind of like a way to verify that this was going to be like probably the right thing that I wanted. So yes, you should understand what you're working with, but you don't necessarily need to understand every single line, especially if you're in a time crunch.
Awesome. You go ahead and take away the next one then.
Yep. Okay. So Heferotron says, "What's up, Chris?" Says immersion is quite important, or it was for me. Listen to podcasts, read blogs, watch YouTube content, engage in the community. However, it is also key to take breaks, take downtime away from programming, enjoy your other hobbies. Looking forward to hearing the episode. Yeah. So absolutely, I think the key thing here is to immerse yourself, make sure that you're surrounded by as much programming content, especially when you're getting started. Like let your passion and your eagerness to learn just like be fulfilled by taking in as much as you can, but also allow some time away from it so that you don't get burnt out.
Yeah, I like the balance Chris put, where it's like it's not just work, work, work. There's also that downtime. It helps avoid that burnout, which we're all familiar with. And I like that he kind of named different types of resources you can go into. When I was learning, I had like a list of blogs, YouTube channels, and like online video courses, websites that I would always go to. And it was always a constant stream of information constantly coming at me, and that really helped. That immersion really helped me integrate all of this iOS development stuff into my brain. So the next one, this one, we need to ask him like how to pronounce his name, but I think it's Iro.
I think
Iro.
it's Iro. It's two eyes.
Yeah, that's right. It's Iro. So Iro said consistency. Keep writing and focus on learning one field and one language. So if there was like one piece of advice I could give anyone, it's persistency or persistence or consistency. You're gonna have people who just wear down or stop after the nth failure don't make it in anywhere in life really. So the one thing that I think separates successful people from unsuccessful people is just this: like you need to keep getting up and keep trying. I remember there was a founder. It was a movie about like the founder of McDonald's, and early on in the movie, you hear him listening to this tape about like he's a salesperson. He was like he hadn't made it yet, and he was trying to go door to door selling something, and the tape was like supposed to be motivational, and it would say stuff like, "Oh, what makes a successful person? Is it talent? No, there are a ton of talented people who are failures. that's practically like a stereotype at this point. Is it like genius? He's like, no, there aren't a lot of geniuses out there, but there are a lot of successful people who aren't geniuses. And the one thing he lands on is just the persistence. If you keep grinding at one thing and you trust that process, eventually opportunities are going to come to you and you're going to be ready for it and you're going to be able to take advantage of those opportunities. So this resonated with me very deeply. The latter half of what he said, where he's just like focused on one thing in one language, that's also a big tip. You don't want to spread yourself too thin. Don't learn like Kotlin, JavaScript, and Swift all at the same time. You're gonna learn none of them if you try to do that. So narrow your focus and definitely focus on one path.
That's actually one of the benefits about being a mobile developer is that unlike web development where you have to learn 3 different languages, right? HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. With mobile development, usually you could just get away with just learning one language. So really nice thing. Moving on to, I hope I say your name right, Nahel. They said, don't spend so much time looking for the perfect course or book. Just pick something and start learning. Invest some time learning the fundamentals and actually understand how things work. Don't focus on the amount of content you finish. Focus on whether you actually learned something. So kind of going back to one of the points that we had mentioned earlier, make sure that you're learning with intent, right? And then also make sure that you're practicing that thing that you learn. You're not just consuming.
Yeah, I really like this comment as well. So Michaela Caron, I hope I pronounced that correctly. Do not try to learn everything all at once. You'll easily get overwhelmed and won't retain anything. Be consistent. Don't compare your journey to others. For some, it's easy. It's not for others. Don't be worried if you're not learning fast enough, quote unquote. So the big takeaway I got from Michaela here is that a lot of times we look at others who've made it and we sometimes feel discouraged, like how are they able to do that so effortlessly? And what we don't realize is that person started off sucking just as bad as you did. So like there were like thousands and thousands of hours they spent training and studying and practicing that you're not seeing. You're only seeing like the end result of all that. So don't compare yourself to others in a negative way, at least. Just compare yourself to yourself and, just look at where you are today versus a month ago and you'll see improvement there. And if you see improvement there, you're doing the right things.
Yeah, this kind of takes us back. Oh, also, what's up, Michaela? She's awesome. Always look for the unicorn. So this takes us back to like one of our previous points because what you want to do is you want to make sure that you're always having an end goal in mind, and that's where a lot of people can get overwhelmed, is if they don't have an end goal in mind. Now you can have an end goal in mind but still feel overwhelmed, and then that's when you really need to break it down task by task, break the problem down into smaller chunks, and then figure out what step you need to go through, and this will help dissipate some of that like overwhelmed feeling. Because what you want to do is you want to just focus on building one little thing that may turn into, something that's a little bit bigger. And then you put, 2 other things together and then it becomes bigger and bigger. And then you finally accomplish the goal. So this will really help with that overwhelmed feeling.
By the way, before we go on to the next one, that's actually one of the most helpful tips I got early on in programming. Breaking things down, not even just like in terms of your learning path, but in terms of like if you're trying to implement a feature, one of the most helpful things is just to break down that feature into smaller problems and then focus on the first problem and then the second problem and just solve it that way. When you do that, what's this complex, overwhelming thing becomes so manageable.
Absolutely.
You got to take away that last one right there.
All right. So we had a tweet from Dustin. Dustin said, "Don't be afraid to quit. A bad communicator. There's a wealth of instructors out there. If you're not getting it, move on to a different author, course, or website. Figure out how you learn and seek engagement that speaks to you." So this is a really great point because everybody learns differently. And I'll take myself, for example. I learn primarily through video. I'm a very auditory and visual learner, but some people are really great at consuming information through reading blogs, articles, and books and stuff like that. I can't learn that way. So, especially if you're working with somebody else and they're saying, hey, like, read this book or read that book or read this article, and learn visually, kind of like how I do, then maybe you need to learn through video, or vice versa. Maybe you're trying to consume through video, but that's just not working for you. Maybe you need to read a book. And then, just like Dustin said, keep in mind that different people explain things different ways, and you may vibe with this other instructor more than some other person, right? Like you may understand the way that they explain it a little bit more, not necessarily saying that they explain it better, but it works more with your mental model with how you consume information, and the other way that you were trying before may just not like vibe with the way that you learn or intake information. So never be afraid to try to learn from somebody different.
Yeah, a lot of people have this aversity to quitting things because I think when we commit to reading a book or finishing an online video course, we kind of put it on ourselves to finish the whole thing. And I had to teach myself this. I would be like, oh no, I have to go through this, and I would push myself and be miserable the whole time. And I've developed the ability to just quit. And quitting's not always bad for all the reasons you just said. It's better to fail early or quit early so you could save time and go on to something else that does work with you. So yeah, 100% good advice from Dustin right there.
Yep. So I think that's pretty much it for the community feedback. I think that's it on the points that we wanted to share in regards to learning efficiently. If we missed something, what did we miss? Was there something that was just glaringly obviously that we missed and then we should have shared with everybody? Let us know about it. Anything else that we have to say to these people, Eman?
Yeah, so it looks like we're finally getting into a schedule with this podcast, and every Monday night we're gonna be sending out a tweet basically asking the community for feedback on whatever topic we're gonna be covering soon. So if you wanna, keep an eye out for that and you have things you want to contribute every Monday night, and if it's a poll, we try to make it last to like Friday, Saturday. So just keep an eye out for that, and if you want to contribute, please do.
Yep, absolutely. So that's going to be it for this episode. I hope that you learned something new about learning efficiently. You can find us both on Twitter. You can find me at KILO_LOCO. That's Kilo_Loco. And Eman, how about you?
Yeah, I'm at Eman Harut, so EmanHarout.
All right. So that's going to do it for us this week. Hope you learned something. Hope you enjoyed the episode. And most importantly of all, we hope that you go out there and keep coding passionately.